Hey guys, Brass Facts here. About a year and a half ago when we went on that Bend, Oregon trip, I got to shoot a number of very nice long-range precision guns, and immediately I was hooked. So much so that I went out and, well, as you've seen on the channel, I bought a really nice one. And then I bought another one. Now, for me, this was always going to be mostly just a fun affair, something that I've always wanted to do. I've always wanted a just very nice precision gun, but it was never really something that I thought was all that practical for the prepared citizen. But the more I use it, the more I began to understand the capability that something like this brought to the table. So yeah, that's what we're going to do today. We're going to talk about the capabilities that dedicated sniper rifle-esque weapons bring to the table, what that exactly means, how we can use that in certain scenarios, what those scenarios might look like, but also talk pretty heavily about scenarios where these things probably aren't that useful. Join me on another Brass Facts infused SHTF LARP scenario video. Should be a good one.
This extreme LARP fantasy was brought to you by Venture Surplus. Before you skip forward by liberal use of the L button on your keyboard, by the way, that's what that does, 10 seconds forward every time. Venture Surplus isn't just an online retailer that sells surplus gear at a fraction of the cost of new production gear that often functions just as good. They also actually have a very neat social media presence. Like, check out their Instagram page where they have a lot of useful, or their YouTube channel where they provide useful information about all the surplus gear they sell on their site. Honestly, some of the videos here just provide, good information and make it justifiable to subscribe to this YouTube channel for the sake of it, and forget the fact that they're actually a business as well. Also, look at Lucas's beard, this thing is fucking majestic. I ended up watching their USMC two-man combat tent and I kinda want one now. Alright, anyway, back to the video. Before we can really understand what the purpose of such a weapon is for the prepared citizen, we need to discuss what exactly the rifle is, as to me, I think the use case follows the capability. Now, the term sniper rifle tends to get some people riled up because for whatever reason, no one can agree on the exact definition, and different definitions tend to piss people off. And we get stuff from a sniper rifle is a rifle that a trained sniper has, to a sniper rifle is what gives the designation of sniper, and of course, everything in between. For the sake of this video, I'm going to stick to a very basic, overly simplistic, arbitrary definition, just so we can get to discussing the concept while all being on the same page. So don't get too bent out of shape, I'm not trying to redefine anything, this is just what I think it needs to function in this conceptual role. So on that note, the Brass Facts edition of what a sniper rifle is. A weapon that uses a more powerful round compared to the average round, and a rifle that is nearly exclusively equipped and built to enhance the ability of that round to engage at distance. Let's break it down. A notably more powerful round is fairly self-evident. In the United States, 5.56 makes up the predominant amount of intermediate rounds, but stuff like 7.62x39 and 5.45 would also be a quote-unquote standard issue round. So, just right out of the gate, 6.5 Creedmoor and 308 and rounds like it already represent a very notable raw range upgrade, as well as obviously terminal effect. I think this critically disqualifies something like an SPR from my definition pool. From a raw definition perspective, yes, the SPR is a sniper, but let's put a pin in it for a bit, and I think you'll understand why I excluded it. Good lord, if I'm sounding stuffy, it's, we're getting full spring right now, so I'm pollen, the usual. Yeah, we're doing that whole spiel again, so apologies, but I can't get rid of the gravel voice. Okay, the second tenet of the Brass Facts sniper definition is the rifle itself. It's not enough to just carry and utilize the round, the rifle itself must be designed and focused around the task of shooting far. That means accurate barrels, a scope that can effectively utilize the round's range, as well as mounting points for items like bipods, tripods, maybe even attached rangefinders, and more. This, as a result, partially disqualifies battle rifles. Rifles that tick our first box, a weapon that utilizes a more powerful round, but due to its designation, makes concessions like barrel profile, optics choice, and more for the given task of being a fighting rifle first and foremost. This same disqualification also sort of applies to hunting rifles, a rifle that utilizes a more powerful round, but makes notable concessions to be lighter, portable, and usable at hunting ranges. In a sort of more layman's or basic terms, we can kind of sum all of this up into a single sentence. A sniper rifle is a rifle that has been equipped and built around the objective of shooting very far at the expense of all else.
So, before we really get the ball rolling on this, we need the usual disclaimer. I know viewers of the channel kind of get sick of these, but I think they're important to have nonetheless. For starters, I am not formally trained in any way. I'm not military, I'm not LE, I haven't been to a huge number of precision courses. I'm not formally trained in the usage of sniper rifles or long distance style shooting. I just set up targets at long distance and then I shoot them. That's really it. So while I do, shoot fairly far, as is afforded to me by living out in the great lands of Utah, I am not even remotely close to an expert when it comes to discussing something like this, which is why I'm going to keep the topic mostly focused on the capability and potential use cases for something like this, something that isn't very often discussed, instead of really telling you what to buy and how to use it and all that stuff. So keep that in mind as we go through this video. I'm by no means an expert.
So we have our sniper rifle, a weapon designed to the exclusion of all else to be used consistently and effectively at the extreme ends of the round and the skill set of the user. But this comes with the cost of being an extremely heavy, unwieldy, and generally actually somewhat fragile due to the large glass we put on these compared to Generalist rifles. This, in a discussion of POU, quickly cuts a huge number of potential use cases out from underneath us. Unlike the military, we do not have a whole platoon or company backing us up, so the times where we want someone in our group to utilize a 15-pound accurized rifle that struggles to keep up with everyone else, both in terms of just carrying the thing, feeding the thing, and maintaining high rates of fire, is going to be pretty limited. We exist in the era of cake and eat it too, and a Generalist rifle package is actually much more capable than we often give it credit for.
And if we want more terminal effect at range, well, you can buy much nicer 5.56 rounds or make the jump to a 308 battle rifle while still retaining fighting rifle capability.
A dedicated sniper rifle is not for most people, as the cost-benefit analysis is skewed utterly towards the it's not worth it range. I think you need a very dedicated task to really utilize that last 15% or whatever it ends up being over these Generalist package. So, what is that use case? It lies in utilizing that upper end of diminishing returns of its capability at the extreme edges of the range. Anecdotally, Hop was feeling damn good about his 6.5 Grendel performance at just over 1,200 yards, which I instantly deflated by having him get behind my gun, one that he had never shot to this point, and then he instantly nailed, I believe, 5 of 5 shots at that distance with very little effort.
It's alright, I guess. Whoa, nice.
While each upgrade in optic and caliber from the 5.56 GPR to the 308 battle rifle result in a range increase, they all remain roughly in the same envelope of performance, say roughly, right out of my ass, sub 800 yards or even sub 600 yards for their optimal usage, because they're really limited by their primary goal of being a fighting rifle. Only when we shed that requirement and move on to dedicated range systems do we find we have a rifle that can confidently put rounds on target, where other non-dedicated rifles would be essentially mortaring in rounds. This standoff of anywhere between 3 to even 600 meters, allowing this rifle to have an area of operation where it can essentially engage targets with impunity, making it an ideal area denial weapon.
This gives us a useful secondary ancillary effect where a sniper system tends to also provide what we call force multiplication. Bucking the conventional wisdom of firepower and mass being a critical determining part of what wins a fight, in this scenario, your firepower while low in volume is effective, and the Op4's firepower, while potentially numerous, is functionally ineffective, thus giving a relatively small unit size the ability to engage a much larger unit. We saw this a lot in Afghanistan, where many American forces lacked endemic sniper systems early on to engage, say, a dude in pajamas up in the mountains with a pre-sighted Dishka. At the time, the solution was to bring the M14s out of storage, fire maneuver, and $500,000 airstrikes. This kind of gets to why I don't consider 5.56 SPRs or battle rifles to be true sniper rifles, because they lack the oomph of a large round, or they're just simply not optimized for range use, respectively. I consider these rifles to be more consistent at range versus your generic rifles, but they don't meaningfully create any standoff. In any range these rifles do excel at function within the effective envelope of a modern GPR. Okay, that was the hypothetical. Let's talk about some potential real-world cases that I've, kind of hashed out a war gamed out.
I'm going to be mostly focusing on what we've discussed thus far, utilizing that force multiplication effect and the area denial aspects, and kind of use that as a baseline to discuss one of the many use cases for a weapon like this. Of course, there are many more use cases. I just want to focus in on this one.
Reminder, once again, we're existing in the land of SHTF, somewhere all the way at the top of the preparedness chart. Anything below this is going to have sniper rifle usage as basically a domestic terrorism weapon.
Which, actually, historically, that is also a use case.
So let's set the stage with my favorite pet theory, partial government collapse, though you can certainly extrapolate this use case to other scenarios. But in partial government collapse, the government is beginning to lose control over large swaths of its territory, mostly rural areas because they become prohibitively expensive for a failing government to manage. In these scenarios, we've seen countries, even recently, precipitate the emergence of cartels as the new power in the region. In others, we see roving gangs. In others yet, we see local, for the lack of a better term, warlords emerge. The theme is the same. As the government begins to retrench back to its areas, as its power wanes, we see non-state actors fill in that power vacuum as humans tend to do. And while that is actually somewhat useful and does provide some degree of stability, these entities typically need to exert this control via fear, violence, and more violence and other things that generally a lot of people are quite uninterested in partaking in. Communities that desire to remain independent and not attach their future to this entity will find the only way to fend them off is with force. While at some point a mass versus mass or direct confrontation will likely precipitate, understandably this is going to be often a losing proposition. The hostile force in question is organized, semi-competent, otherwise they wouldn't be at this point to begin with, so they cannot be underestimated and often will be able to overpower individual communities. In these scenarios, it pays to employ strategies that are asymmetric in nature, one of which is the use of area denial. While you can approach a community or town hypothetically from any direction, it is simply not all that practical, especially in large countries like the United States, where a force would hypothetically have to move it and its logistical base through tough terrain over triple-digit distances. Thus, practically speaking, especially in the West and Midwest, most rural and countryside communities are really only accessible through roads and mountain passes. This means choke points, expected paths of ingress, all of which can be exploited by a relatively small force. Mountain passes especially can utilize sometimes as little as 4 people, maybe 2 of which are equipped with these sniper rifle systems with a 500-yard standoff to essentially cripple a slow-moving incoming force and deny them the ability to pass through that area without first dislodging this very small force. And that requires a lot of effort that often may not be worth the squeeze, and thus could potentially remove your community as a target that is worth exploiting. While this capability is defensive in nature, we can actually flex this into a more semi-offensive role. The insertion of small teams with these weapons into the fringes of hostile space allow them to pick off individuals and, once again, in a very disproportionate trade of resources to deal with. This isn't just a case of attrition, but perhaps more importantly, modifying SOPs of the force in question, area denial around key resources, and perhaps most importantly, mental fatigue on the force in question. This keeps the pressure off of what you are ultimately defending by moving attention elsewhere. The most frustrating part, perhaps, for the opposing force here is that should they eventually try to look to seek out parity by equipping their own units with weapons like this, and of course the training to match, the momentum is still mostly in the favor of the first to the table, as counter-sniping is a significantly harder act than the act of, well, sniping itself. Okay, that was my spiel. These long-range rifles are expensive, not just on cost, but time investment to build and cultivate the skills to make them actually really capable of utilizing their full potential, to the point where it can begin carving out a niche against its tendency to be a somewhat inflexible weapon. For most people, for like the 3rd time now, I don't think this is a worthy investment. It's a very hyper-specific scenario that is very unlikely to occur in the United States. But it's a fun skill to cultivate nonetheless, and hopefully I've made the case today for a potential use case of these types of weapons, where a small group or even an individual, by preparing now, building up that skill set now, can leverage a very large influence in a potential shit hit the fan type scenario. Alright, you have to work for this one though. Can I get a rollover? Rollover. Oh my goodness.
Fucking annihilated.